blocks are, how do we take those and implement them in our own organizations. Some do's and don'ts of branding, some common missteps that we see, especially in our industry, wanting to make sure that our brand stays present in front of guests. And then kind of talking through how to tell your own brand story and kind of going through and implementing then some of the building blocks that we talked about, and then we'll have some time for Q&A. Anything to add, Craig?
No, echoing the same thing you said. Let's get started.
All right, so we'll start with what's in a brand. So one of the common things that I hear from property managers when we think about branding is your logo, right? That's the visual representation of your brand to the outside world. But there's so much more to building a brand beyond the logo. So when we think about branding, we want to think about the way that we're making our guests feel. So it's not just the colors or the imagery, it's a lot about how we're interacting with our guests to get them to feel the warm, fuzzy feelings when they think about staying with us again. So I like some of these kind of more broader perspectives of branding. So it's not just about a product, it's about the way that people experience, and we're in a very experience-oriented industry. So I think this resonates really well in our industry in particular because we're so experience-focused. And I wanted to kind of hit on this accumulated meaning. So when we're talking about the guest experience, when we're talking about how guests are interacting with our brand, it's not just one touch point. It's that accumulated meaning over time. So every time that someone finds you on an OTA, when they land on your website, when they get their pre-arrival emails from you, when they walk into your property for the first time, after they leave, what is their experience like, and what is that accumulated meaning over time that that guest is going to have that associates your brand and your properties, so that hopefully we stick in their minds, there's a positive experience, we give them those warm, fuzzy feelings, so that by the time that they're ready to book their next vacation, there's no question in their mind that they're going to come back and stay with us. It's like I was in Boise a couple days early and working on this presentation last week, and found this awesome little chart here. And one of my friends, he has an MBA, and literally I walked into the bedroom I was sitting in, and he was like, "Hey, Jenny, do you want some books?" And the first one was about developing your brand. And I was like, well, this is perfect because I've got some nice little notes for my presentation here. And the reason I put this up, I'm not going to go through all the details, but this is a great brand equity model. And I wanted to call it out a little bit because it kind of shows these different levels of how we think about branding. So first, your identity. Who are you as a brand? Your meaning. What are you as a brand? The response of what about you should a guest remember? And then the top of that pyramid there is what about you and me? What relationship is the guest going to have with your brand on an ongoing basis? So why is branding important? Less than 20% of travelers remember who they stayed with 60 days after checkout. That is a huge missed opportunity if we're not getting in front of them during their stay. So we really want to make sure that when guests arrive on property, that we're able to get that brand in front of them, and not just with the person who booked. Especially if you've got some larger homes, it's great that we send out emails to whoever the person who booked is, but when they walk into that house, they're probably more than just one person that booked, and that person might just think that they're staying in an Airbnb. So when we get guests on property, that's our really huge moment to shine when we talk about branding. It's like, I'm sorry, I'm like railroading through here. So kind of thinking through what are all of the different touch points that your guests are going to have with your brand. And so this is every different kind of platform across all different channels. So yes, your brand is more than a logo, but the logo, your typography, your tagline, how that's presented on your website, how your OTA listings look. Are your property photos representative of what a guest is going to experience when they walk into the property and the stay that they're going to have, not just on property, but in your local area? Do your social media images match that experience? If you've got some really nice, like you maybe outsource and you got a really great social media person who's posting pictures all the time, wonderful. If that, if those are low quality or high quality images and a guest walks in and what they see in real life is not what they've seen on social media, it's not what they've seen on your website. Kinds of language that you would use consistently. Language is a big thing. I was talking to a property manager last night, and he was saying that he overheard their call center. They have cottages, and that he overheard one of his concierge people answering the phone, and they referred to them as units. Totally fine. It's not inaccurate, but he said, I'm worried that my guest experience isn't going to be as positive because I want people to know that we have a specific type of property that we offer. And so thinking about how we're using language in all areas every time someone's going to interact with our brand. Pre-arrival emails. Great opportunity to get your brand in front of someone before they arrive. In property materials and branding. So maybe you've got shampoos or some little amenities. Great opportunity to get your branding on there. Property guidebooks, so spoiler alert, that's what I do with Guest You Guide. We're a wall-mounted digital concierge. It's a great opportunity to connect with your guests, even when you're not on site to greet them. If we've got great materials in property, we're still able to kind of lightly build that relationship between the guests and our brand while they're on site. Just a quick poll here. Who has actually stayed in their properties or had their staff stay in their properties during off-season to see what that guest experience is like? I would highly recommend, especially if you've got some shoulder seasons, it's a great opportunity to maybe, get great input. There's a lot of things that we might not realize that are funky about some of our properties or our workflow of how to check in, how to check out. I stayed at a property that I built a website for a client that I consult for, and she said, hey, we're starting our new bookings, but before we rent out this property, we need to stay in the property. And we discovered that the water smells because of some plumbing issue, and the whole entire house reeked from this water issue that they had. I was like, ooh, I'm getting robot voice. Surprise. And we were able to identify several of these issues because we stayed on property. The furnace broke, and we discovered that the upstairs of the house was absolutely frigid in the evening. We bumped up the heat, and it turned the downstairs, it was like a sauna. It was like 100 degrees downstairs, and upstairs it was like we had to be under 6 blankets. So thinking about how do we put ourselves in the shoes of our guests to identify some of those things that might be a point of frustration or that might not give them the brand experience that we're hoping to deliver. And the best way to do it is to really put yourself in their shoes. And so the reason I mention employees, it's a great opportunity to get some outside feedback, some different perspectives, and it's a nice little reward maybe for your employees if they want to have their family come stay for a night. It's a nice way to kind of pay back, and we're getting kind of different input and feedback that's beyond kind of what the 15 hats that we wear every day as property managers.
Yeah, so this list kind of looks similar to like when LiveRes, when we have to build websites, it kind of looks similar to like our required list, required assets, things we need. Of course, logo, You always want a logo that is easy to be recognized, a logo that can work at any scale, large, small. A good logo could be used with one color, things like that. And okay, next slide.
So I've seen this floating around the internet for a long time. I kind of feel, no offense if anybody uses Comic Sans, I feel like it's probably like the cilantro of typography. You either love it or you hate it. I actually got into an argument with my boyfriend because he used Comic Sans on something. He works at a brewery. And he was like, "Do you think that this font looks good?" And I was like, you're joking, right? But the reason I bring this up is because typography is one element of visual aesthetic that we're able to visually represent our brand. And I thought that this said it nicely. The Comic Sans, like it's like the way to be passive aggressive on a sign. And if anybody wants to hear my rant on Comic Sans, I've got a really great article that I could not link here because there's a lot of swear words in it. But it basically talks about how Comic Sans is this like fun font. And my boyfriend told me that I was the Comic Sans of people. And I was like, he thought it was a compliment. And I was like, we're gonna have words about this later. I appreciate that you think I'm fun and adventurous and loud all of the time. But please never call me Comic Sans because I will sit in a corner and cry. But we are a Fortune 500, not a lemonade stand. I think that says a lot. We want to make sure that typography and those visual assets that we're showing to the world resonate with what our brand actually means. If you're if you've got luxury properties and you're using Comic Sans or Papyrus or some of these other fonts that maybe aren't as refined, that's one little visual element, that's one thing where there might be a disconnect between what a guest actually experiences and what you want them to experience.
Yeah, this is an industry I've noticed where a lot of things are traditional, which may work depending on how much your area and the history of the location plays into the state. So sometimes sometimes your argument or understanding or message can kind of, deliver or make someone say, "Oh, okay, I understand why you have that logo. Okay, I understand." So if you want to be traditional, if you don't want to necessarily change, sometimes if you have the correct messaging behind it, that's okay. But a lot of times in this industry, we have logos that may have gradients, 5, 6 colors, and it's like we need to simplify it. We need to make sure people can notice your logo, people can see it, people can know that's an N, not an M, because of the type of font you've used. So a lot of traditional fonts are more like serifs, any fonts with the hanging T's, the hanging footers or so, and more modern font serifs, so more tech company serifs, clean, nice fonts. So always think about, the message, right? The message behind your font. If you say you're tech, if you say you're new, if you say you're modern, but a lot of your things, but you don't update your social media. You have pictures that look like they were taken with grandma's, camera. You know what I mean? Like, those are things you always have to consider because, the guest may say, "Oh, you're so modern, but your Facebook page hasn't been updated since 2018. Or, things like that. So always consider the whole ecosystem, Go ahead.
So again, when we're talking about kind of our visual brand assets, who here has a graphic designer on staff? Anyone? A couple people? Awesome. I will say I've been in marketing, digital marketing, for the last 10 years. You need to get outside design help sometimes. I've found myself, I'm lucky that I've had a lot of really talented design colleagues. I'm in marketing, I manage social media, I build emails, I build websites. I do all of these things that are marketing related. I still ask an outside design consult because there's some of this stuff that I'm like, I think it looks good, but I'm not really sure. I highly recommend getting that outside input from a designer if you're struggling with maybe your visual brand assets. Ask someone for help. Even if it's just a one-off time, a good graphic designer is going to be able to help you really identify how to represent the brand you're trying to present to the world in a really pleasing visual aesthetic way that's going to resonate with people. So I like acronyms because I think that it helps us remember things. So is your logo smart? So what do we mean by that? Craig was just talking about simple. So we want to make sure that our logo is able to be translated from a website to our social media. If you've got branded shirts that your staff wears, when you're thinking about designing your logo, simple is key. It doesn't mean we can't have some complexity here and there, but we want to make sure that it's going to be able to be scalable. So is it memorable? If your logo looks exactly like every other logo, we're missing an opportunity to really differentiate ourselves. Our brand is our opportunity to differentiate from our competition. So making sure that there's something about your logo that people might see it on a bag or on a business card or somewhere in the future and have that visual recognition. Is it appropriate? So back to the font conversation. Does your logo actually match the brand message that you're trying to share with people? Does it match the experience that guests are gonna have? Is it resizable? I feel like you probably have some commentary on the resizable piece. But if you're using an overly complex logo and then you try to put it like on a billboard, we wanna think about the opportunity to physically scale the size of the logo and make sure that it's gonna translate. A lot of times, overly complicated logos might look really good on the header of your website, and as soon as you take it and try to blow it up and put it on a shirt or a bag or something, all of a sudden it doesn't look so good. So when you're kind of going through that logo design process, make sure that you kind of play around with what it looks like on different platforms. And then timeless. So I know we were talking in the class I was doing yesterday about how to build a brand and then pivot. And so we want to make sure that when we're developing all of these visual aesthetics, that we're not just thinking about what our company does right now today. What are we going to do in a year? Who are we going to be in 3 years? Who are we going to be in 5 years? And think about how you can take those visual aesthetics and make sure that you're setting yourself up for long-term success. Anything to add?
It's all good. You already know. When it comes to logos, as designers, web designers, graphic designers, developers, we always want, the AI, Illustrator, EPS files we can manipulate so that whether we need to put it on your billboard or put it on a business card, we don't lose any form of quality of the logo. So and it's important. That's the only image asset on your website where we say we need that high quality. Everything else can be like 72 web standard, but when it comes to your logo, that's the one thing we'd say like, no, this has to be high quality because we just can't have a blurry logo on your website.
I'm gonna let you talk through some color stuff. So colors, I put this up here because I think that when we're thinking about brand colors, there's a lot of psychology that goes into how to use specific colors to send that brand message. And so do your colors instill a feeling that aligns with your brand? I know that there are a couple of people that I've worked with in the past who have selected brand colors because they really like them, but they don't necessarily always jive with the message that they're trying to send to guests. And so there's a lot of really great, easy information about how to select colors based on specific feelings that you're trying to instill in someone. And so take a step back and look. Does your logo, do your brand assets make people feel the way that you're trying to make them feel? And then also, how does it, again, translate across different platforms or different channels? So something that looks really good on a website the colors might not look great on a mobile device. They might not look great on like Thread. Think about kind of how those colors that you're selecting are able to translate across different visual brand aesthetics.
Oh, also too, I mean, a good example, if you have a spa, wellness center, maybe there's not really red in the logo, you know what I mean? Because you want someone to feel calm, ready to relax. So things like that. Also too, usage of color. Just because your logo has, maybe yellow and orange doesn't mean your website, each section, make this section yellow, make this section orange, you know what I mean? It's still important to have a clean canvas and to be very selective on which section has the color, and sometimes the tone of the color. You know what I mean? So always consider the tone of the color and the usage, the amount of color is being shown. Just because this is your brand color, so doesn't mean we just throw it everywhere because we can. You know?
And the last point here, do your colors work in harmony together? So if you've got multiple colors that you're using for your brand assets, make sure they don't clash. We don't want our guests to like look at our logo and like cringe because we're trying to use colors that don't work together. So make sure you're looking at all of those kind of different pieces when you're developing your logo and your website to make sure that it's appealing. So we've talked a lot about kind of the visual piece, which is the way that we present to the outside world. But as I mentioned, the brand is more than a logo. It's about our brand promise. What makes you different? What are you promising to deliver to your guests, and how are you positioning that? So maybe it's that you are a trusted advisor. Maybe it's that you have really, really great safety protocols and you're a family-oriented business and you want to let people know that when their family comes to stay with you, that they will be safe, that you've taken the time to make sure that your properties are suitable for toddlers. Maybe you're talking about value. So that can be high value, or maybe you've got some really great, more budget properties. Location and local expertise. What are you doing to share your local knowledge with your guests? That yes, they come to stay on our properties, but they also come to our destination because they're looking to explore where we live. And so how are you sharing that information with your guests so that they are not just associating your brand, but also that they're excited to come back to your destination? There's a little bit of destination marketing that we need to do as well, because if someone comes once and maybe they like the property, but they're not experiencing the local touch, they're less likely to come back and choose to vacation in your town again. Family oriented, so if your demographics or that you have a lot of families, make sure that your branding speaks to that. I know Matt at Family Time Vacation Rentals does a really, really wonderful job in his branding, in his website language, in his emails, because their target demographic, most of their guests are families. And every single piece of branding that he puts out speaks to the fact that it's a family-run business and that they market and that families come to stay with them. If you've got awesome hospitality or concierge services, again, that's an opportunity to differentiate us from some of our local competition. Let your guests know what you can do to help make their experience optimal. Your amenities. So if you want to, if you've got, again, those larger luxury properties and you're putting soaps and whatnot in your properties, if they're paying $3,000 a night, I want maybe some like nicer shampoo. So thinking about those little things that help a guest really, really connect with our whole brand promise and our messaging. Pet friendly. Who here allows pets on properties? Awesome. Talk about it. That is one of the things that people, especially kind of coming out of the pandemic, nobody wants to leave their pets at home. If people don't know they can bring their pet, they might not choose to come and stay with us. So it's a really great opportunity not just to let guests know they can bring their pet. Where can they go walk their dog? Where is the local dog park? Where are the dog-friendly beaches? How can you help not just the guests, but our little furry friends also enjoy their stay, because we know when dogs are happy, we're happy too. Or maybe that's just me, but I like cuddling with dogs on vacation. And the last thing here, so think about your target guests and put yourself in their shoes. So what are we trying to promise our guests? And it's not just about you. Your brand is about you, but it's not all for you. And what I mean by that is our brand is for our guests, it's for our employees, it's for our prospective homeowners. And it's really important to kind of get that outside input, outside feedback to make sure that we're developing a brand and sharing that story in a way that resonates with all of those different stakeholders that we're trying to get in front of. It's very important that you like your branding, But again, we also need to make sure that we don't just develop a brand that we really like that doesn't resonate with the people that we're trying to reach. I threw in a couple of brand examples here to kind of drive home the power of branding. So think about these brands. So iPhones aren't the most advanced phones, but they are a status symbol. No. Apple has done. I was like, I mean, I like my iPhone. I'm totally in like the cult of Mac. But part of the reason that I'm willing to spend $1,300 on the new iPhone is because it's a status symbol. Because Apple has spent the last, 20 or 30 years building up an amazing brand. So when I see that logo, I know exactly how that makes me feel. It makes me feel fancy. It makes me feel luxury. It makes me feel like I have I'm on the top of the world and I can do anything. That's what Apple's done over the last several years to really drive that home. So when we see that one logo. I don't even need the words. I know that's a Mac symbol. Starbucks doesn't have the best coffee, but they have the most expensive coffee. They absolutely, I saw there's like another image that I was gonna throw in here, and the difference between a generic cup of coffee that you pay $1.50 from the gas station, probably the same coffee, they probably use Starbucks coffee, but Starbucks is gonna charge you $5 for that. Part of the reason that they're able to charge that premium is because they're offering a luxury branded experience. Toyota isn't making anybody's dream car. I was like, sorry if anybody has a Toyota, no offense to Toyota. But they've built a brand that makes them safe and reliable. It's not necessarily the best car on the market, it's not a Beamer, but you know what? I know my family's gonna be safe. I know it's gonna get me from point A to point B, and I'm willing to invest in that brand because that's the brand promise that they've shared with me. And McDonald's certainly is not making the best burgers. I'm not even sure if it's all meat, but I know when I go to a McDonald's, I'm gonna get a cheat meal and it's gonna be fast. McDonald's doesn't have to tell me that. I already know because that's the brand messaging and the brand story that they've been building for the last 75 years, I think. That's really their shtick. It's not the best food, but it is fast and it's cheap. And I know when I go through the drive-through, I know exactly what to expect. Although I will say, in my hometown, we have the absolute slowest McDonald's. Every time I went through the drive-through, it's 20 minutes. And I stopped going to McDonald's because I was like, literally the only thing that's good about this, your promise to me, is that it's gonna be fast and cheap. And it's not fast. It takes longer than like actually cooking myself a real meal with some real meat. So again, branding isn't just a logo, but it's what that logo represents and how we're making people feel about our brand.
Yeah, people, they don't buy your products, they buy what you believe in. So.
Absolutely, and there's, I'm reading a book right now called Experience Economy, which I highly recommend. I'm only like 2 chapters into it, but it really talks about how we now live in an experience economy. We want to provide these amazing experiences for people, and we've shifted, especially post-pandemic or mid-pandemic or whatever we're gonna call this weird phase that we're in right now. People have been pent up at home. They're willing to spend more money than they ever have before to have an amazing experience. And so how can we really shift our thinking so that we're helping them have those experiences and build kind of that positive brand association between the experiences that they're having and us. So yesterday we had a conversation in our book Direct Bootcamp about pivoting. So how do we take a logo, how do we take our visual aesthetic, our visual brand assets, and change them, shift them over time strategically, because we don't want necessarily a brand new logo that we've spent 10 years with the same logo, the same branding, completely tossing it out the window and starting fresh. You're losing that brand equity that you've already built. But there's a lot of really great ways and examples for how to kind of change those visual aesthetics over time while remaining. So we see Google changed the font that they use, but you'll see the color scheme has remained consistent. They've just kind of taken it through the times. And so my kind of urge here is it's important to be consistent, but it's also important to be open to how we can change when we need to. Google recognized that they were using a serif font, and that wasn't resonating with their target demographic anymore. It didn't look as fancy as they wanted it to, and so they shifted to a slightly more refined font choice, while also kind of shifting over time with those color selections. Anything you want to add about Google?
No, Google is one example. Yahoo is another one as well. I can think of eBay as well, where they kind of keep colors, but they may change the font, just so that you still recognize it by seeing it, but that extra second is like, oh, look, the font has changed, the look slightly changed, so it's not stepping away from what is created, but, also putting a new twist, because understanding we have to update this. Times are different. We need to update the look.
So another example that I like here, so I'm definitely of like the Spotify generation. I'm quite confident that Spotify recognized when they launched that did not resonate with their millennial audience. It looks dated. It looks like I don't even know that I saw that Spotify logo because I didn't pay attention to that brand until after they changed their branding, because it did not look like something I wanted to pay $12 a month for. And now they've updated their branding. They've got a sleeker look. They've kind of kept some of those similar kind of brand visual aesthetics, but they've elevated it to better reach their target demographic. So we're gonna go into some do's and don'ts. So these are your action items, hopefully. Maybe, yes. So number one, identify your brand standards and develop guidelines. And so what I mean by that is if you have one marketing person, that doesn't mean that should be the only person in your company who knows how to scale your font, how to do kind of some of these visual aesthetics. It's really important to keep that consistency. And the best way to make sure that we stay consistent is to outline what we want people to do. It also makes it a lot easier to bring in maybe a contractor to help us redevelop a logo if we've got some guardrails around what we're trying to accomplish, how to use our fonts, when to use a certain heading font versus a body text, all of those small little things, and having some guardrails there can help make sure that we're able to remain consistent in our branding across all platforms. Consider scalability. So as we talked about earlier, when you're building up that brand identity, think about where you are now, where you came from, where you are now, where you want to be in 12 months, where you want to be in a few years. Thinking about how do we don't pigeonhole ourselves into necessarily one direction, but get enough visual aesthetics and kind of get enough of our brand story nailed down so that we can hopefully scale in the future. And then put your branding in your properties. So when a guest books with us, we've got maybe one or two people who are aware of the company that they booked with. Again, if you've got some larger homes, you're probably gonna have at least one other guest that steps into your property that doesn't know where they booked because they weren't the person who did it. So making sure that we're kind of capitalizing on that guest stay to get our brand in front of people, because the last thing we want, and I'm sorry if anybody from Verbo, I don't think any of the OTA people are sitting in the room, but the last thing we want is for guests to leave and think that they just stayed in an Airbnb. We want them to come back directly to book with us next time. We want them to remember us. We don't want them to remember an OTA that they paid a bunch of fees and that's great if they came to us that way, but making sure that we've got in-property branding can really help spread our brand beyond just the guest who booked. Common brand missteps. Lack of professional design input. Again, please, if you don't have design skills, that is totally cool. Not all of us are as talented as people like Craig. Get some professional design input. Get some other eyes on your branding to make sure that it's resonating. Not reaching your target audience, huge misstep. If we develop our brand just for us because we like it and we're missing our prospective homeowners and our guests and our employees, we have a misstep there. Again, pigeonholing, so kind of getting too specific with our branding so that we can't scale. That's an issue that a lot of people run into. They maybe think they're gonna start with 5 properties in one destination, and then a couple years down the road, we discover we've got 50 properties in 3 different destinations. We can't predict the future, as I think we are all very painfully well aware, but don't get so narrow with your brand selections that you're pigeonholing yourself into one direction so that you can't kind of pivot and include whatever your brand promise is gonna be in a couple of years. Think ahead and keep it flexible. Fear of change. It is okay to change our branding from time to time. I think I heard someone say yesterday that you should do a rebrand like every 10 years. I don't know that I'd ever heard that before, but just because you have selected a brand promise, a brand story, doesn't mean we can't take a step back if we realize it's not really resonating or if we've changed as a company. It's okay to change some things up, just do it strategically, get that professional input, and make sure that you're smart about it. Inconsistency. So if we have different branding and different names and our website URL doesn't match the name of our company and it says something different on Facebook, our Facebook page is called something different, those words are how people are actually going to be able to find you again. And so make sure, do a little audit. Go to all of your different online platforms and channels. Make sure that your verbiage that you're using is consistent across all of those platforms. And then last year, the online-offline translation. So again, if we have a great social media images and a guest walks onto the property and is like, you had very, very sexy photos online and it doesn't look like anybody has actually stayed in this property and the cleaner mist, there's like dust everywhere. We want to make sure that when a guest steps into that property that the brand experience that we have promised them pre-arrival is consistent throughout their stay. That's when we start to get that mismatch of people not really understanding or not really appreciating what we have to offer. They feel like we lose a little bit of trust with them because we've offered something that we're not delivering. It's not billed as sold.
Also to know your competitor, know what they do well, know what they fail at. It's important to know, in your industry as well. So not just what's going on with you, but what's also going on with, the people you're going against.
Absolutely. And again, we want to differentiate. So we need to know what our competitors are really good at, and we want to know what we're good at, and we want to promote what we're really good at. And the best way to do it to beat our competition is to know what they're really good at. Maybe even go stay at your competition's properties to see how they're doing things. It's a great opportunity to just kind of step out of your own hat and step into somebody else's property. And you might notice things about your own process or your own branding through being able to kind of not have such a personal approach to it. When you're looking at somebody else, you're able to kind of see things from a different perspective, and that knowledge can be incredibly valuable. So I was listening, Will Slickers, the MC of this event, has a great podcast. If you guys have not listened to it, I highly recommend. There's several really awesome podcasts in the industry right now that have kind of just kicked off. All of them have some really awesome content, talking with property managers and vendors about how to build a brand, how to scale a brand. And on Will's podcast, I'm not going to remember the name of the guest. I think it was Samantha Hardcastle. But it's an episode all about branding. And she used a phrase that I really love, which is experience gap. So when I'm talking about the difference between that online, offline translation, we want to mind that experience gap. We want to make sure that the brand promise that we're telling people is actually what we're delivering. Because again, when we miss that step, we're breaking that trust and we're less likely to have a positive, memorable brand impression when they check out. So really take a look and think about if you're delivering a return on experience. So in business, we always talk about return on investment. But now we're really, again, in this experience economy. It's not just about the monetary value that a guest is giving us to come stay at our property. It's that we want to make sure that they feel that their time was well spent with us and that they've enjoyed their experience enough that they feel like they're getting something out of it and that they want to come back. And again, it's not just guests, it's our employees, it's our homeowners, it's every time that we are interacting, our brand is interacting with another stakeholder, we want to make sure that that experience that they're getting, those warm, fuzzy feelings, is consistent. So now, my question for you all is, what is your brand story? Why should guests book with you, and what differentiates you? So I'm curious, I'm gonna do a little impromptu thing here. Does anybody wanna share what one of their kind of unique value propositions as a property management company is? I know a couple of you were in class yesterday and we already talked about this, so I know you guys have answers. I'm looking at you. Anybody? Anybody want to share their unique value proposition? Nobody? Do you know what a unique value proposition is? Nods? Anybody?
We're very on-site.
Awesome. So that's your, so do you meet guests at property or?
No, I mean, we have keyless entry and everything, but we will. I mean, it's between the three of us, there's always somebody that can go fix whatever they need or bring them whatever they need or.
That personal touch.
We're very personal.
Awesome. And that's something that you want to talk about and share through your branding. If you're going to be on site, if you're available to help a guest, whether it's figure out the TV remote or the hot tub or go find a great restaurant to go out to for your anniversary dinner. Those are all little opportunities that we have to help share that brand story when it's not just our name and our logo and our tagline. When we're able to deliver on that brand story, we're able to resonate with our guests for a longer period of time. Anything to add? Because I'm speeding through because I think we have 10 minutes left.
No, I mean, just what you put online, just that the whole gap thing, customer gap. If you're a luxury stay and you give out bags and the quality of the bags are questionable, just think about all those things. What you pass out, what do you give out, what do you offer? If your brand is we're luxury and this is how we treat you and these are the expectations. Just think about that as far as things you print, things you give out, even your bed, your stay. Just think about all that translate into the message and the value the customer gets, and the website. It's a whole ecosystem. So don't just say, oh well, it's just a coffee mug, or oh it's just linen, or it's just bed sheets. They say, hey, you say you're luxury. You say this. Just think how the message needs to translate through products, through the site, through your photos, through the customer experience. Just always consider everything, to fully give that whole brand experience.
And I will definitely say I've stayed in some fancy hotels, that the bed sheets were scratchy, and I'm a little bit of a snob about bed sheets. And I'm if I'm paying a premium price, you better put 1,000 thread count sheets. I want it to feel like butter when I get into bed. And there's hotel brands that I now won't stay with because their linens are itchy and I don't like them. And it's little things like that that we don't necessarily associate with our brand all of the time that can make such a huge difference, especially in terms of getting people to come back and repeat book. I'm gonna skip over this because I didn't really talk about Guest View Guide much, but we are giving away a Guest View Guide. So if you're curious about in-property branding, come over to our booth, chat with me. There's a lot of strategies that we have that I'm happy to chat with you guys about in terms of specifically in-property branding. So if anybody's interested, feel free to scan our QR code, enter to win one for free, stop by our booth if you're interested. Any questions? I know we're gonna chat later. I know you have questions. Yeah.
I have two, and you can answer them or take them offline. So, as it relates to photo collateral, I like pretty stylized photos. We try to create images that have, not over, but have martini glasses and chips and dip and set second question I will ask you is, I have my logo, I have my brand in the house, guests arrive, there's caddies with notepads branded, post-it notes, sticky notes, postcards, which you
Yep,
heard
I
about
love,
yesterday.
it's like, I love his postcard idea.
I have a local chocolatier that makes a little box of chocolates we leave with our logo. I have a coffee roaster who makes a logo for Relax. Robes that I spent 6 months picking out because I wanted a specific robe. I'm currently switching over amenities. I use Molten Brown. If I'm going to put my logo on a bottle, I want it to be mine,
Yep.
not somebody else's
Yep.
product. Am I over branding? I mean, I want
No.
them to be personal experiences, but am I really taking this commercial and hotel?
No, I would say honestly, there's no such thing as over branding. We're kind of like goldfishes in a lot of way. Like, we have a very short memory span, especially when it comes to branding. And so the more opportunities that you have to get in front of someone with your branding and with your logo, the more the better, in my opinion. Do you have a different opinion?
I think there's the debate, right, between business and branding, right? And if you chose 10 new items, and out of the 10 new items, there's one that only 5%, and you see not much profit is being made, then you have to, as a business owner, make that decision. You know what I mean? So if a lot of people are requesting a certain item, you get a lot of feedback about a certain item, then this is not a debate. We're keeping this, we're owning in on this. But if it's something like, I branded these water bottles, no one really care, I see it gets left in the room, I see it gets tossed out, then that's, as a business, owner, it's like, all right, well, there's no point putting funds to this anymore because it's not even appreciated. You know what I mean? And maybe there might be a better idea to put it, you know what I mean? So I think there's that business part where it's like figuring out, are these even being used? Does anyone even care? You know what I mean? So those are where you have to look at your margins and expenses as an owner and just
Figure out
it
what's, and then I skimmed over your first question, so I'm curious.
Hands.
Are there people in the photos that you talked about, or is it just staging?
Just staging.
So that's one thing that I have read a lot about, is if you put people in the photos of actually experiencing it, I think it's a little bit different than just having a staged photo. Like, we don't want to give that inconsistent experience, but I think when there are people in the photos, it kind of gives us a different feel because there's the assumption that those people have actually set all of that up, whereas it's just a staged photo. We expect that that's what the property is going to look like when we arrive. And so we can offline, I want to look at some of your photos and maybe we can figure out how to get more photographers and get some lifestyle shots in there. Yes.
All right, so earlier you said something about from the perspective of your logo, your name, connecting that with your domain name.
Yep.
Well, I chose my name because of what it is and where it is and what I do. But after I'd already done that and created my logo, then I went to find the domain name. The domain name was $10,000 to buy because it was such a popular name, they scooped it up, and I wasn't going to pay $10,000 for it. So what do you do in that case?
It's like,
Because
find out how to bid against it. I was like, I know, Condo World is a brand. They actually, one of the biggest brands, and Alex is on a bunch of podcasts in the industry, and they have been actually chasing a domain name for I think 15 years, because their domain had a hyphen in it, and that's not their branding. So chasing after a domain, if you're really scaling your business, a lot of people bid on domain names. But otherwise, I would say, as long as you have some of those common elements in your domain, so that we want to make sure that guests know how to get back to our website to book directly. And the easiest way for them to be able to find us, if you're not having a branded domain, make sure that your website is optimized for search, so that if people search your brand name, that you're going to show up on page 1.
In this case, Google Analytics, right?
Exactly. I was like, check out your Google Analytics. It's like I talked a lot about that yesterday.
That's a good point. If the keyword, maybe the domain is not the actual what you wanted, but if the keyword search ranks and you show up as number one, then maybe, you know what I mean, that's okay, because what they search for, they found you number one on the list anyway, so, you know, things like that can compensate.
And also, like, if you're having trouble ranking on Google and you're really trying to get your brand out there and you're kind of struggling with some of those domain name and branding inconsistencies, it might be worth some paid advertising dollars to make sure that you're showing up in a paid ad slot, even if you're not ranking organically. That can be a really expensive, but also great way if you're really dedicated to kind of building out your brand equity. Make sure that you can at least pay if you're not searching organically. Any other questions? I was like, I think it's almost time for lunch. I was like, I'm excited for lunch. I heard it sit down, so I'm very excited to sit and eat. Any other questions? Awesome, you're all free to go. Have a wonderful lunch. Thank you so much for coming. I'll unplug this. My brain hurts. Is this one? I had 2 Red Bulls
Oh, okay, okay.
and coffee and a liquid IV.